happen. Mar-a-Lago is maybe 5 feet above sea level, most of it. It's going to disappear. Now, maybe not again in Trump's lifetime, but his children will get to see it disappear. And so, you know, it depends. You know, on any city, San Francisco is actually relatively, because San Francisco is built on it's like Rome. It's built on a series of hills. They're going to lose the waterfront, but the main city will probably persist. The same thing is true probably of parts of Los Angeles. San Diego is at more risk than Los Angeles. It depends on how high the city is. You know, if you go around the world, you can see. I mean, one of the things we used to have, in fact, my wife used to have it. She gave it as a cup to one of our graduate students who was studying climate change. Was a coffee cup, and you can buy these. You can probably look online and find them. Is that if you pour hot water? It's a map of the world. And if you pour hot water into it, all the areas that are going to disappear as the climate heats up and sea level rises start vanishing on the cup. Yes, sir.
You mentioned barrier islands. Barrier islands migrate very nicely. It's just the houses can't migrate with them. So
well, that's true. That's what I'm saying is that
the
all
islands will persist.
ecosystems are remarkably resilient, but humans love permanent, at least contemporary humans love permanent dwellings. This is one reason that, you know, everybody tends to talk about indigenous peoples on the plains as if they were kind of primitive, but in fact, they moved all the time. And they, you know, like if you look at the history of the Kaw Valley and all, they didn't come into the Kaw Valley in spring. They would plant crops down there, but they would not live down there because they were worried about the floods. And if you look at some of the floods that have periodically inundated this area, you realize they had a good sense of what they were doing. Now, when you were talking about New Orleans earlier, they've got levees. Now, how long the levees can hold out, and we saw what happened during Katrina with the levees. Miami's too committed to its beaches. So we're all, I just use Miami as an example. It's basically all of South Florida is going to disappear. Miami's just the type specimen. We're going to lose the Everglades too, but that's, you know, that'll have some impacts on diversity, biodiversity.
Miami has like a $400 million plan.
Oh, I'm sure they do.
Trying to put drainage pipes in.
They already have it. Have you been in South Florida? They have all those canals. Those canals are meant to drain the water that was, because basically southern Florida used to be one large sheet flow river going from Lake Okeechobee down to Florida Bay, and they dug canals all through the area to try to channelize that and actually give them some land that wasn't underwater all the time. But if sea level rises 10 or 15 feet, there's not going to be anything they can do. Now, right now, in fact, I don't know if you guys have been watching the news, but some of those shorefront hotels and apartment complexes, they're constantly pumping because their basements are constantly flooded with seawater right now. Right as we're speaking today. Yes, Karen.
I was talking to I was talking to a couple in the Merck last week who is thinking of moving to Lawrence, and they're looking for a buyer of their beachfront property in Florida. So they're suggested they need to find a climate denier to sell it.
Well, they should be able to find lots of them in Kansas. Maybe Sam Brownback will buy it.
Can you tell us a little bit about species situations in Antarctica?
Antarctica has the benefit of having that continent down there. That continent changes everything. It keeps the weather much colder because when there's no light, areas get cold. The Arctic can't get that cold because it's a big basin, but the Antarctic can get very, very cold, which is why the coldest temperatures recorded on Earth are either in the middle of Canada, the middle of Siberia, or the middle of Antarctica, depending on who you talk to. But those areas, because the continent gives them tremendous benefit. Now the Antarctic Peninsula is probably going to become ice-free. And a lot of people are talking about, oh, we're going to lose emperor penguins and Adelie penguins. No, they'll they'll just move further into the continent and along the shorelines further in. Now, there may become a point, but I'm not really sure that penguins really have to have ice to breed on. I mean, they're used to it, they've evolved to do it, but I don't think they have to do that. I think they're perfectly capable of breeding. And the big benefit they have, no polar bears, no wolves, no grizzly bears, no indigenous peoples, so that there's no real predators, so that they can go on land, they can retreat onto land without having to worry about, predators wiping out their colonies. And the seals, the only one that's really in trouble may be the whale seal, which is the Antarctic fast ice breeder, but they're also very, very flexible in their behavior. So I think the Antarctic species will make it through much better, primarily because they have a continent to retreat to. Just like the Canadian archipelago, where there's land to retreat to and land to keep fast ice and everything, you have a much better chance of creating refugia where the species can hang out. Yeah, I would have brought up Antarctic species, but quite honestly, I don't think they're that much at risk. Some colonies that people have been studying for a long time will probably disappear as they retreat, but the birds themselves and the mammals, I don't think they're going to have much of a decline in numbers. Unless krill start dying. That would be the only thing. If krill numbers collapse, then the Antarctic would be in trouble. But in terms of the climate, I don't really see it having that huge an impact on them. I mean, leopard seals show up in Australia, so that they clearly can survive up in much warmer waters. Yes?
I want to ask you about your comment about extinctions and what we know about that. A recent book that I read really impressed me was The Hidden Half of Nature by David Montgomery.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of what he talked about was that it's only been the last 15 or 20 years that we've been actually able to really understand soil microorganisms.
Exactly.
And that, for a long time only 10% was culturable. And so we've come up with other techniques. And the same way with the gut, the microbiome in our own gut. That it's only been the last few years that we've been there.
Yeah.
So how does that play into our understanding?
Nobody evolves faster than microorganisms.
Mm-hmm.
This is why antibiotic resistance is such a concern for us.
Mm-hmm.
Microorganisms, because they have such fast turnaround times and they're so plastic and they exchange genes with each other and everything, they evolve really, really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So, you're right. I mean, we probably some of them, it'll be like a lot of the other situations we're talking about where we may lose some of the forms, but even right now we don't have any idea how many species of microorganisms there are. We went from having an estimate of, when I took microbiology as a college student, way back longer than I want to admit, they used to say, there are the round ones and the rod-shaped ones, and they acted like that was all there was. Well, now we know there are probably more species of microorganisms than all the other species on Earth combined.
Right.
And so that's what I said earlier about we're probably losing them, but we're gaining them at such a rapid rate that it becomes really difficult to track. But I don't see them disappearing.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about organisms that some of them can live in hot springs, and
Right.
some of them live literally on ice. Some of them live, hundreds of feet or thousands of feet underground in places. We're organisms that can practically live any place you can imagine, and can make nourishment out of practically anything. There are species that feed on oil. There are species that break
Sure.
down all sorts of toxic chemicals.
But we're also dealing with microorganisms that are the basic fertility of our soil systems.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And the plants that we get from it, and the human health that comes from that.
Right. Well,
So, fully
the risk
getting a
you're
better
talking
understanding
about, I
of.
think the risk you're talking about is if the plants go. The
Uh.
plants are more vulnerable than the microorganisms. If the plants die and there are microorganisms that are specialized to live on those plants, they may go as well. But that's sort of, in a lot of cases when you're looking at extinctions or even the death of organisms, you're trying to figure out, this animal was sick, got a disease, and it fell down and hurt its leg, and then a predator killed it. Well, which of the three things, what do you put down as the cause of death? And with extinctions, we run into that sort of thing. I mean, if a species is completely dependent on another species for its environment, I mean, one of the things that we have to really think about when we're thinking about that is the mitochondria that live in our cells, our bacteria, the power plants of our cells, that we actually are ecological communities as much as we are individual organisms, and we tend not to think of ourselves that way, but it's actually true. And these organisms that are in our cells, obviously, if a species goes extinct, its mitochondria also go extinct. But you had a question?
Oh, well, there's a couple of, you commented that the plants can't migrate, and of course the individuals can't.
Right.
But the climate belts, except for the ones at high altitudes, will shift north.
Oh, of course they do, yeah. And organisms move them, and humans move them. I mean, one of the things that Karen was talking about, some of the research I do with working with native peoples. I mean, one of the things that Kelly Kincher and I have, and Kelly's the person who really found this, but if you look at a lot of these, the distributions of some of the plants that were important food plants or medicine plants for some of the tribes, their distributions make no sense ecologically, and it turns out the tribes were moving them all over the place, you know, for thousands of years before Europeans arrived and started, oh, well, this is their natural environment. No, they were moved. I mean, there are incredible stories with that sort of thing. My favorite one is one that a very famous evolutionary biologist at Berkeley told me when I was a postdoc there, which was, it was sort of a joke on him and his research group, that they were working near Clear Lake in Northern California, which is a large freshwater lake up in that area. And they found this this population of willows that grew completely differently. They were really, really straight and all. And so they were trying to, what, is this a new species? So what's going on here? And so they examined the soil chemistry, they looked for nutrients, they looked for water flow, they looked for climate, they looked at everything. And one day they were out there and there was this old Pomo woman. And they said, well, you seem interested in these willows. And he says, oh yeah, they're very important to us. And he said, do you have any insight into why their branches grow so differently than all the other willows? And she said, oh yeah, we've been shaping them that way for several hundred years. They make the much better baskets this way. So he was saying, that was sort of a real, there's a tendency to think that native people had no impact upon the environment, and that only when Europeans came did people actually start thinking that there were environments and that the organisms had to respond to it. No, they were shaping everything constantly. And so, if climate change happened during their lifetimes, I'm sure they moved a lot of species after the glaciers retreated. I'm sure they just took a lot of species with them and planted them wherever they went. And there are people doing that now. I mean, I was reading about somebody that was finding plants that are suffering from climate change, and they've started a whole program of transplanting these up into newer, higher latitude environments where hopefully they'll do better. Yeah, I mean, we know how to do this. It's just that on their own they struggle a bit more, but they're almost never on their own. That's the key thing. Animals move them, we move them. Other animals move them, we move them, so that they do have ways of getting around. That's true. Yes, ma'am.
Speaking of transporting species, what do you suppose would happen if someone transported some polar bears to Antarctica?
You have a lot of very unhappy seals and penguins. I don't think that's going to happen, because outside of Coca-Cola commercials, I don't think that's going to happen. Because you notice you always get the Coca-Cola commercials with the penguins and the polar bears together. But I can't see anybody deciding that, oh, we really need polar bears in the Antarctic. Yeah. It's a interesting thought experiment, but I don't think it's gonna happen. Yes, sir.
You mentioned a couple of times talking about the Endangered Species Act. Do you see politically, the way things are going right now, that are gonna have either a negative or a positive impact on that?
Well, it depends on the species, obviously. I mean, you know, anytime it's something like a snail darter or a, in this part of the country, the Topeka shiner or something like that, you hear people, oh, but this species is so insignificant, we need to worry about it. If it gets to be a big charismatic organism, then there's a lot more concern. So my feeling is that the real problem is there's such tremendous ignorance in everybody involved, both opposing and supporting the Endangered Species Act, that they don't really know what it is they want to save or how they plan to save it in many cases. So that a lot of it's just sort of grab bag patchwork. I once worked with a guy who'd been in charge of the red wolf recovery project. And neither he nor anybody who worked with him had any idea what red wolves really were or how they were supposed to survive, and they just futzed around. And I mean, they took them into captivity. The California condor people have done a better job, but the red wolf people did a terrible job, but the irony is that there are still red wolves out there in southern Arkansas and northern Louisiana and places like that, you know, pure ancestral red wolves that I bought a hide at a fur auction in Arkansas that, you know, I picked up the hide, the nose was up here and the tail was brushing the ground, and I paid $10 for it as a coyote hide. There's no bloody way that's a coyote hide, and it's in the KU Museum mammal collection right now. Anytime anybody wants to do DNA on it, I'm pretty sure they'll find it's predominantly red wolf, if not entirely. And then I talked to some of the trappers, and they say, oh yeah, we see them wolves all the time. And they said, well, why are you selling them as coyotes? They said, well, if we called them wolves, they'd tell us we couldn't trap them anymore, and we can still get $10 or $15 per hide for them. So, but they know that the local people know they're there, and you know, I mean, they're not in love with them, but they don't hate them either. So they just treat them as part of what they experience in their environment down there, in the swamps and along the Arkansas-Louisiana border. Yes?
What are the chances of chiggers going extinct?
Very small, because I think chiggers have a way of moving.
Yeah.
They're a warm climate species predominantly. In fact, I talking to some people in Kansas who told me that they didn't used to have them 50 years ago, that they moved up. It's like when you and I were talking about ticks. They never used to have ticks in California. Now there are ticks everywhere in California. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned bugs and insects, and worms specifically in local in the Midwest area, and bees, honeybees,
Yeah.
and other insects and bugs. How is this all going to be affecting us locally in the near future?
Well, honeybees are, what's hurting honeybees has nothing to do with climate change as far as I can tell. They're getting some introduced diseases, and they're not a Native American form.
Correct.
I'm more worried about the native bees we have, which we actually have an awful lot. I never realized how many until I worked with students at KU that are doing taxonomy, and realized that there are dozens, if not hundreds, of species of bees that are native to this area, most of which we don't even know they're bees, they're so little and things like that. But they're around. I think the pesticides are much more of a threat to them than climate change.
Correct. But
Yeah.
it's also a declining populations.
Well, if you're talking about honeybees.
The windshield splatter
Yeah,
has been something that a lot of us have been talking about. By the way, I'm a beekeeper.
yeah.
And so window splatter, a lot of us are noticing our windows in the summer, our windshields are not getting
Right.
bug splattered at
That's
night.
another one of the samplings, although
Yeah.
it's not nearly as precise as some of the studies that
No,
you do
but
in
it's an
Europe.
observable,
Yeah, it's definitely observable.
yeah. And so I wondered, how is that, not necessarily this aspect, but you did mention pesticides and another
I said
loss of
herbicides.
habitat, herbicides, loss of habitat,
Yeah,
and so on. And that is something I'm very
yeah.
focused on right now, and our agriculture is very focused.
Bees seem to be really patchy. Some people I know are doing it, their bees seem to be doing fine, maybe they just haven't caught something, maybe they're somewhat immune or more resistant. Other people have had real problems with their bees, so.
My
I'm
experience
not a
is
bee expert.
not just bees, but I mean
Yeah.
just bugs in general.
Well, no, with bugs in general, I mean, at one level, I think a lot of people are probably thrilled that there are fewer grasshoppers in some areas, but you know, there can be too many grasshoppers, but right now, at least on my place, there's too few. I don't say I envy the person who said they had a whole bunch of them, but what?
They're still alive.
You probably
Oh,
are,
yeah.
there are probably microenvironments
Yeah.
within the
Well, I
area
don't
that
use
they,
any
that
pesticides
they
or
thrive,
herbicides.
yeah.
Well, our place has
Sign
not
up.
had any pesticide use on it for at least 25 years. And normally we have what we call a popcorn popper when we drive across our driveway in late summer and early fall. And I think one day this fall, I saw maybe 20 or 30 of them. But we never got anywhere near the popcorn popper phenomenon.
Do you hear much about yellow jackets? I noticed a lot more yellow jackets this year, and I've been hearing about it and I went to Michigan and they were having a horrible time, and came back and we were still having a horrible time. Is there any chatter or research about that?
I don't know anybody specifically looked at that. I actually like wasps, especially the paper wasps. I mean, I regard them as being a really valuable part of the community, of our community out on the land. Yellow jackets are a bit more aggressive,
Very.
and hornets, I like the idea that there are hornets, but I don't want them living right around my house. It's like rattlesnakes. I'm thrilled they're there. I don't want them in my backyard. Anybody else? Yes.
Can birds sneeze?
Yes. Or cough. It's hard to tell exactly which they're doing, but they do this kind of. Now, whether it's a sneeze or a cough, I don't know.
It's a snoff.
What?
It's a snoff.
Yeah, whatever. But I mean, my birds, when they get sick, especially when they get some sort of respiratory infection, will often be doing a kind of type sound.
As our temperatures are changing, through the winter, shifting and so on, how is that affecting the local birds?
Oh, their ranges are changing. I mean, the most obvious to me are the Canada geese. They hardly migrate anymore. They move back and forth with the fronts, but they don't go all the way to Louisiana. They're perfectly happy to winter in Kansas as long as our winter is the way they've been the last few years.
Yeah.
But if we get a cold snap, you'll see them flying south, and then when a warm front comes in, they come back.